panel, I have. Please, the round should be very engaging, hence you are encouraged to ask and take POIs. Those things would be prioritized in this round. It's getting to the close of the round, so please let's have an engaging round. Prime Minister, please start the debate for us.
Begin my speech in. Can I request not to be filmed? No, I'll be filmed by force. Okay, beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this is an economics debate. We need to clarify what the debate is actually supposed to look like, so there is no confusion and for the debate to not be messy. What is the debate about? It is a regret motion. We are to regret the rise of retail investments. It means at every point in time, every side is supposed to engage with the regretting of the rise of something, not the idea in and of itself. First off, what is the metric of regret, or at what point do we start to regret something? We can only regret something if it is proven that it has caused a significant amount of harm, something I would do in my case. But secondly, we will give you a counterfactual as to if we are not regretting it, what the other world will look like and why we think that is inherently better. But thirdly, we will show you what the harms exactly are and we'll prove to you everything that we say we'll prove to you in today's debate. But first off, what is the nature of retail investment? Looks like things like stock buying, like investments in cryptocurrencies, like buying of bonds, etc. But these things also include things like people constantly investing in things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, things like Binance, etc. But how does it happen? It requires things like spec knowledge. It means that people actively have to acquire an amount of skill to actively invest in these things. They have to know things like how market trends work, when the market is likely to generate more profit or when it's likely to dip. But secondly, it requires an extensive time to study how it works, which is that learning it requires an amount of intensivity, but it has to be detailed and precise for these people to get an amount of profit from it. But thirdly, these market trends are highly unpredictable, which is that there are unforeseen circumstances that highly determine what the market looks like for many of these retail investments. The market is also highly volatile. We'll tell you why this is important. But the fourth thing is on the fact that market changes, any marginal market change has a significant impact on the investment of investors. It means that at every point in time, any change in the market has a significant impact on the profit you're able to make. But the fifth thing is the fact that it's an extremely high-risk venture, which is that it requires you to make huge investments, to make high returns, etc., etc. All this framing contributes to why we'll show you why we should regret the rise of retail investments. Please let me finish my framing before you ask me a POI. But what is the rise of retail investments and what does it look like? It looks like the large-scale proliferation of retail investment and the propagation of retail investment. It's that a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are proliferizing it. But secondly, on such things like social media and ads that constantly are tailored towards people that exist in the world, right? You are constantly being encouraged to actively go into things like retail investment. You are being told to invest in crypto or buy stocks because you can make more money from it. But secondly, because of the fact that there's a lot of focus on the benefits of these retail investments, for people to actively engage with it, there's a lot of spread of misinformation, which means that people who are not actively experts in these things actively tell people that you engage in it a particular way, and because we already tell you that this thing requires a lot of spec knowledge and a lot of accurate information to actively engage with this market, we think that the proliferation has led to a lot of misinformation. But secondly, because a lot of the conversation is centered around the profit people are likely to make and the fact that people constantly have a profit incentive, you have people like celebrities constantly attributing the amount of money, or important people in society constantly talking about how they made a lot of money from it, and people actively be incentivized to invest in it because they think they are likely to get a lot of money from it. What is the importance of this framing in today's debate? It is to show you what retail investments look like. But secondly, it is to show you what the rise looks like and why it is important. Now to our cases before we show you what the counterfactual looks like. One, it means a lot of people are investing and buying into the idea of retail investments. What does this look like? It means that for the average individual or for everybody that exists in places that this rise has actively been affected, it means that people are actively being incentivized to take all their money and invest into it. Back to my framing that these things actually require a lot of investment, which means that mostly you are told to put in a lot of money to actively get a lot of profit. But secondly, you are actively being incentivized to, like, celebrities are actively doing things like organizing teaching classes on how these things work. But secondly, they tell you things like, oh, buy this short course book to study how to invest in the stock market for 300 cedis. And people are actively investing their money to buy into these things because they think that these things can actively give them money. Why is this important? Because you have people in particular countries actively taking out their savings from their bank accounts and from the traditional banking system to actively invest in these things because of two functional reasons. One, the fact that they think they are likely to make more money from it. But secondly, the fact that in most instances, it is the successes that are highlighted and the successes that are proliferated. What is the counterfactual, and why do we think that is one thing that we would not regret? The counterfactual is that we want a world where it exists, but it is not on the rise. Why is this counterfactual better? One, there is a reduced incentive for coercion and the ability to force people to buy into it. But you see, the reason why it is important and the reason why we think that we can actively say that people are being coerced into investing into these things is because of the fact of the way the rise happens in status quo. Because we tell you that the rise doesn't just exist. It means that people are actively being incentivized to lie or to, in most instances, to cut corners to incentivize people to invest their money. But before I go on, you. Panel, I like it when closing teams don't understand stuff. I tell you the counterfactual and what it looks like. The counterfactual is that people will still invest. The reason why we think that the harm is reduced in our world and we don't regret that counterfactual is that the rise is not reaching a lot of people and being tailored to a lot of people. His case that is come to run is on the fact that people are still going to lose money and people are still going to take their savings to invest. The reason why we think that that is a harm that we cannot regret is because a lot more people aren't being made to do it. But you see, for the average individual and for people that exist in societies that the economies aren't the greatest, or for people that don't exist in buoyant economies or developed economies that they don't have a lot of money, we think that it is plausible to regret it at the point where an average individual that actively interacts with things like social media, like apps that constantly have these things being tailored as ads towards you and incentivizing you to invest in it. But secondly, we think that at the point where influencers and celebrities are capitalizing on your need to make more money in places where you don't actively have buoyant economies, we think it's a problem. But you see, the reason why their case on how people are going to invest and why it is important is not enough for us to regret it. It's because at least in a world where it still exists, you have a minimal amount of people still investing, or people that can actively absorb the shocks. Anytime will tell you why it is important for the state for a lot of people to not actively invest in these retail investments. But the reason why our case is logically prior to any case that any side can run to you in today's debate, because we show you two things. We show you what retail investments look like, but secondly, we show you what the rise looks like, and the fact that at the very point where these things are on the rise, it trivializes a lot of the things that actively goes into retail investment. Things like actively getting the skill. But secondly, things like actively getting proper information to invest in these things. But thirdly, the fact that these things are high risk ventures, that you can lose a lot of money, and we don't think it is great for people to actively buy into. We don't think that it's the best thing for a lot of people to actively buy into these things. This is why we regret the world that exists in status quo, that retail investment is on the rise. Any other time in today's debate, we'll have to show you how the counterfactual doesn't make sense before they can win. Proud.
Thank you for your speech.
I start my debate in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the reason why opening government doesn't count in today's debate is because they agree to the fact that the existence of retail investment to some extent has been able to give us that utility, has been able to give us that importance. Because from her speech, she says that it is very beneficial, but what they don't want is the rise. So panel, like, look at this logically. You think that something is beneficial, but you do not want the rise. Just look at this analogy, right? But first of all, I'm going to engage their cases and why we think they do not have a case in today's debate, right? Before I go to my cases. So her problem is that because it is on the rise, people are being manipulated people like they highlight successes and all of those things, so people are being manipulated to do these things, and because they don't have the expertise and all of those things, they are being manipulated to do all of these things. Number one, we think that things like extreme manipulation of investments are things that are catered for by the states. If these things are lies and all of those things, the states has things like regulations that constantly call them out. Number two, even if that is not true, the rise means that look at the rise. This is how the rise look like. The rise look like now people are more able to know, like, this is the reason why there is a rise, because it is now accessible to people. We now know that these people, if they are lying truly, it means that there is some sort of discourse that happens, because now people now know the bad things that they are doing. So it means that when it's on a rise, people get to know and it's more accessible to people. So that means that we are able to solve the problem that exists within status quo, right? Our world is one that we prioritize, right? For you to regret something, it means that that thing has caused significant harms, that it is irreparable, that the benefit that it has given to society far outweighs the harms that it has given to society far outweighs the benefits, right? We are going to show you this a retrospective debate. So if they are going to prove futuristic harms, the harms that have not been existing, that means that they are not even arguing a debate. We are going to show you retrospectively how this retail investment has been able to help society, and why it is unjustified for us to regret something that has given us immense utility in the first place, right? Mary will do a lot of engagement to their cases. Why do we think retrospectively, how has this retail investment helped in the first place? Panel, we do concede that there are harms that are existent within our world, but we think the benefits that we've been able to accrue from this, like from the existence of this retail investment, is something that you should prioritize, right? Number one, it has number one caused increased participation, and it has caused increased market participation, right? The rise of retail investment has democratized access to financial markets. These financial markets were markets that were at first, historically, we thought were for elites and then were for other people, right? But now, because of the rise of these things, people have been able to increase things like market participation. The reason why market participation is important to the states is because we've been able to give people opportunity for them to also accumulate their source of wealth and all of those things. And the reason why wealth accumulation is important for the states is because we are able to tax them without they complaining and all of those things. We've been able to accrue these benefits. The second benefit that we've been able to accrue is how these things have led to things like technological advancements. People, because of this investment, people have been able to create user-friendly apps and platforms for all of these things, right? And the state constantly need to help people to constantly upgrade technology, because human needs are insatiable. So we need to necessarily continuously make sure that technology exists, right? The next impact, the next benefit that this has been able to give us in society, and the reason why we think we shouldn't regret it, is the fact that it has given these people a diverse investment strategies. This is the idea. The idea is that these people are, because they don't have the expertise and all of those things, they are being manipulated and the rest. But we think that the existence or the rise of these things are things that have helped people to re-strategize their policy, because now it is on the rise and we all know about it, because now it is accessible to people. Now we now know that, oh, these are the kind of things that we should engage in, these are the kind of things that we should engage in. So it sparks that kind of discourse. So we are more able to we give people an opportunity to solve the problem of manipulation that they talk about, right? Their word says that, oh, we support it, but we don't support the rise. So if the problems are there, the problems should continuously be there. Our word is one that gives people an opportunity to mitigate those harms, because now we all get to know, it becomes accessible to people for us to have those discourse and competing narratives to clash these problems out, right? Our world is one that is better. They do not have any justification to regret something that has given us immense benefit to society. Their world is problematic, right? Now let's engage them and let's take them out at their best, right? So what do you get from opening governments? They say that celebrities have been using these investment apps, have been using these things to manipulate people, because things like how the successes are the ones being highlighted and all of those things, because of that manipulation exists. The reason why we think that even if it is true, the reason why their award doesn't solve any problem, or the reason why regretting it doesn't solve any problem, is because regretting it doesn't mean that we are not going to engage in all of these things again. So their world is one that is largely symmetric. The reason why the rise is one that solves the problem to some extent, that to some extent is because now we all get to know about these things. We are accessible to them. That's why we are even having these conversations in the first place. At first, it wasn't on the rise. We didn't even know about all of these things, right? So things like manipulation are things that could be sorted when there is a rise, right? So the next thing that she gets from here is that, oh, they agree. That's something that it shoots them on the foot. The fact that they agree that there are benefits of these things, but they don't want the rise is something that is problematic. It means that like they agree that there are benefits. So we're able to show you how the rise is even to some extent mitigating the harms to a very large extent. So it means that they do not have a case from their bench, right? They should do better. Yes, should. Panel, like the rise is not creating a problem. I'm telling you that there are benefits that we've been able to get. It's more like when we say you are regretting something, it means you are regretting the entire existence of that thing. It means that the thing has caused a lot of harms, right? We think that from our world, we think that the things have been able to give us a lot of benefits, and the rise means that the benefits continually increase, right? Even though there are harms that are going to increase, we show you how even the rise itself solves the problem that they are talking about, right? Solve the problem for the reason why they are even regretting in the first place, right? You think that our world is one that is like that you should buy, right? They don't even have a case in today's debate. Except they are telling us that they do not want, they regret the very existence of the investments. If they agree that the retail investment has given us some sort of benefits, it means that the rise means that we are going to continually gain those benefits, like we are going to gain those benefits exponentially, right? Their world is one that is problematic. Mary will do a lot of engagement. Thank you very much.
It's yours. Oh, okay. Just use it. Okay. I begin in 3, 2, 1. What you largely get from here is the burden that in a world where we are supposed to regret something, we need to show irreparable harm before we can regret the action. Largely what my speech is going to do is to prove to you why the rise of retail investment gives these irreparable harms. But 2, I'm going to respond on all the benefits that she talks about and show you how the counterfactual achieves all these benefits without all the problems that she already concedes to. She says a couple of things. 1, that we need to democratize market participation. At the end of her speech, I don't get any analysis as to why people don't participate in markets. But 2, there's no analysis to prove why market structures are actively rigid that people don't participate in. You can't credit her for that argumentation. She doesn't have a case on that. But 2, why is market participation something that's extremely necessary and something that exists? 1, because even in status quo, there exists the fact that traditional banking systems in most instances are creating technological apps, etc., that allow people to be able to invest. But 2, in most instances, states are doing things like reducing things like interest rates in most instances to allow people to invest. In most instances, this is extremely important because the state recognizes why investment is extremely important to most people in that regard. She says that it's about direct investment and that it's user-friendly. What largely she does is to ignore all the cases you get from abundance, when she clearly tells you that what the rise looks like, because the rise largely engages and exists on platforms like social media, etc. What it simply means is that regulation in most instances is extremely difficult. What it means that the average person in most instances can stand up and organize a class on crypto. I can stand up today, create a YouTube channel, and organize a forest class. There are several dire impacts of such unregulated acts and the impact that they have on several people. She fails to engage that frame. She only says that we need to democratize investment, we need to protect these things in that regard. Then she says, oh, they've catered for by the state. There's no mechanism to prove how the way in which the rise exists businesses, the state is able to cater for all these things that exist on social media, given that the info slide clearly tells you that an average person can engage in it. What is the unique mechanism as compared to a traditional system where you can check the people that exist in it, the impact and all the things that are there that exist in that regard? First case and why she tells you investment is something extremely important. We say investment is extremely important for a couple of reasons. One, the flow of money within the system in most instances is extremely important for a couple of reasons. One, for businesses in most instances because they need people to invest in things like financial startups that exist within the state. The difference is that these things in most instances are regulated because they exist within the confines of the state. Two, state needs people to invest specifically in things like the economy, etc., because they need this flow of money to be able to do things like generate tax, get money to be able to give specific people like loans, etc. in that regard. Why is this extremely important? It means that in economic uncertainties in most instances, the state needs people to be able to invest money because these things directly affect the way in which they get revenue and money to be able to cater for the state in that regard. Why do we regress the rise and why is something that's extremely bad? One, because of the competition that inherently exists. What it simply means is that there is a strong messaging that exists. This messaging in most instances has become extremely terrible. Notice that your ability to convince someone to invest is something that is extremely difficult. However, the state's ability to do this thing is something that has been progressive over the years. However, with the rise, it has become extremely difficult because financial messaging has become quite terrible and bad. Several people are told that you can get this amount of money and you can win when you invest these huge sums of money. The impact is that in most instances, because of the economic uncertainties that exist, but two, the incentive for people to multiply money quick in most instances, but three, the way in which it is glamorized in the way that allows people to do it. So the fact that celebrities etc. tell you that they got their monies and their cars from these things, the fact that you can see the cars and all these things are the reasons why people have incentives to do these things in that regard. Why is this something that's extremely bad and why is it something that's extremely terrible? It means that in most instances, because she analyzes to you that these things exist on specific things like ability to determine market trends, because the stock market in most instances needs you or require you to study the market trend over a period of time to be able to determine whether you will reap money or not, you will invest. But two, in most instances, the spec knowledge that you have is not sufficient enough to determine whether you make investment. That is why there are even instances where the gurus themselves keep losing huge sums of money. What it simply means is that there's a lot of disincentive in the event that people are actively losing their money. The impact is that in the event that the state needs people to invest in, it actively becomes extremely difficult. The impact is on a couple of reasons. One, when people are refusing to invest because they invested in something that took their money, the impact is that your ability as a state to be able to get tax and revenue from people that invest in your banks, to have things like loans, to give startup businesses that exist within your states becomes extremely difficult. I am showing you clear harms that exist on the state. The impact is that it actively collapses startups that exist. But three, the revenue that the state puts in this place in most instances is not realized in that regard. It's something that's extremely bad in that regard. They say alternatives don't exist. I've proven to you why the alternative that exists largely encourages people to invest. Like the banking system that exists, banks in these instances chase people. Like we have banking apps on our phones, like I don't know what she's saying about people not getting to democratize these things in that regard. But three, there's a more decentralization of these banking systems for specific instances. That there's a lot of things like education, etc. that exists in that regard to allow people to be able to do this.
Yeah, to be very honest, it's about
Yeah, I think that is much better because this is a world where the states can track. Your world is one that the states cannot track. I'm going to run a case on why regulation becomes extremely difficult and why states has to be playing catch up in an attempt to deal with this kind of people that exist in that regard. One, because this things exist on specific places like social media, etc. What it means is that it becomes extremely difficult in most instances for the state to be able to deal with these things. She says that they solve the problem. You know why that is a lie and why it becomes extremely difficult? Because it exists at a place where anybody can do it. It means that the state cannot actively monitor what happens. It means that the state will later always be discovering what the harms are. The impact is that the state always has to be playing catch up in dealing with all these harms that should exist. But two, regulation becomes extremely difficult because you are chasing a certain harm that you don't know the extent to which this harm exists. The impact is that people continue to lose all their revenue. This cyclical order of problems continue to exist in that regard. Lastly, it's a conversation on how it affects people that are most vulnerable in most instances. Because the way in which this messaging works is that it preaches it in a way that makes it so appealing and so attractive to people to want to invest. The impact is that in most instances, people that don't have the money in the first place will do everything possible to get these monies to be able to do this things like the investment. The impact is that in most instances, these people become more vulnerable when they lose their money because of how volatile I've analyzed how the market trend exists. The counterfactual is a word where it exists, but people who want to and people who have the money and capacity to can do it. They are secured. The state can actively track the regulation that exists.
I'll take POIs when I can. Kindly don't bother my speech. I'll start my debate in 3, 2, 1. There's a reason why these guys cannot win today's debate, right? What they tell you is that, they regret the idea of the rise of this particular narrative from our side, right? Panel notes. I'll analyze to you why exactly we think that that very premise is what makes them lose this particular debate, right? What they tell you? They tell you that, they think that this particular system in itself is one that is lucrative and that people have glamorized this, right? We think that from their speech, for the mere fact that they are able to talk about how there's social media exposure, etc., and how there are benefits on our side, we think that proves how within societies, people in themselves would always be incentivized to engage in this particular investment, right? It means that at a point where people will continuously have that particular interest to be able to invest in these things, the logic is simple. To be able to try to regret this particular thing is not a solvency to the problem that exists, right? Because if you simply regret the rise within societies, that interest will still incentivize people to try and then buy into this ideology. This is not a world where they say they are banning this, they are just simply regretting the rise. If you regret the rise, what happens? People will still have an interest in these things because these things are lucrative. There's social media influence, there's glamorization, like they tell you in their world. That's why Akosha stressed on the rise issue. The rise is not the regression of the rise is not a solvency to the problem. It's our side that solves the problem in today's debate, and I'll analyze that to you within my speech, right? But that clearly takes away all of their cases about exploitation and all of those things, right? Because if you argue things like exploitation, etc., then it means that once you are able to provide an alternative to this particular problem, we solve all of the things that they are crying about in today's debate, right? We think that the bulk of today's debate is to analyze whether or not the increase in this particular retail investment is one that should be promoted or regretted. They say regrets the idea because they claim it comes with all of those assumptive harms that they give to you, right? Understand that this is a retrospective debate, right? We are arguing in the context of whether or not these harms in itself has happened or not, right? From opening opposition, we think that there are a lot of assumptions from their side, right? But then Akusha analyzes to you a lot of brilliant things as to why exactly these particular things in themselves are ones that have been able to serve some form of utility within society, right? That is why her speech is what wins us in today's debate, right? What does she tell you, right? She tells you why or analyzes to you what these particular retail investments in themselves look like, right? The idea that it involves people investing in these things because of the kind of utility that it comes with, right? She tells you how there's no necessity for regret because these guys clearly don't prove how their harms are exclusive to their side, right? But thirdly, we tell you why from our side we think that there's the need for regret is one that is going to cause more problems within today's debate, right? What does she tell you? Our first case in the fact that there's an increased market participation on our side, right? What does this mean, right? It means that with the existence of the rise, there's an increased desire for people to participate in this idea, right? It means that the rise is a good thing, right? Leading to a better understanding to some form of financial system that exists in that context, right? There are cases that people will be exploited, right? But then our side tells you that by the mere fact that there's a rise in this particular thing, people will be having that particular interest and that incentive to know more about these things, right? I.e., people will be interested in the financial system and how exactly these particular things in themselves are able to reap some form of benefits for them, right? What that then does is to empower individuals to invest within that particular sector and even other economics that would help them to boost their own personal growth and financial development, right? How? Because we think that just by the mere fact that there's a rise and then there's glamorization like these guys preach, we think that people in themselves are able to sell the idea as one that is highly profitable. That in itself is one that draws more attention to how beneficial these things are, right? We think that the more people invest in this particular ideology, the more we are able to grow the economy in diverse ways, right? Because the economy cannot be always about the stagnant things that we know, right? This is a new idea within society, right? And we think that at a point in time where it has been able to create some form of lucration or some form of benefits within society, there is no existence or like there's no necessity for them to regret. These guys don't have a case, right? But Nakosa once again tells you how we think that within our world and how exactly the market participation has caused things like how there's friendly user apps, etc. Right? We think that explains our world as to how exactly it is our world that allows for inclusivity. Because today's debate is not just about the investors in themselves, right? It's about the people who are beneficiaries of this particular system in themselves, right? But the next thing we tell you that is our world that fosters another sector or another level of employment within society, right? Retrospectively, this has created a new segment of employment for people, i.e. people who are able to use these particular ventures to be able to engage in entrepreneurial activities, right? Without our world, these people in themselves will not be able to have that particular sector of employment happening, right? We think that at a point in time where these things in themselves have become beneficial, then there's a necessity for the rise to happen, right? Because if there is a rise that causes these things to happen, it means that employment as we see it within society, within that particular sector, is one that will be scaled up, right? We think that their world is one that does not argue the retrospectiveness of today's debate, right? But we think that when you regress the idea in today's debate, it comes with a lot of huge problems that our world is not ready to take care of, right? What does that mean, right? One, there's a regret. The regret in itself is one that stifles innovation, especially when I've been able to analyze to you how it's our world that directly transcends not just from the interest of these particular individuals to create things like employment, etc. Right? We think that by the mere fact that there is a rise, people in themselves will have that incentive to be able to find ways and means of promoting that particular sector in the way that suits their own interest, right? What that then means is that the increased market participation is not just for just a minute people, right? But then to all of the individuals that are concerned within that particular sector, right? But then lastly on diminished opportunities, right? We think that Akosha tells you about how it is our world that promotes things like accessibility. It's our world that creates opportunities, right? For people to be able to invest in this particular sector and reap of its benefits, right? They need to prove why the kind of opportunity that we offer on our side is one that cannot be really gotten when the rise happens, right? They need to show why on that side of the world the opportunity is one that is lost the moment we are able to get that particular rise. These guys don't argue that, right? But then they argue a lot of weird things in today's debate. Let me engage them, right? First thing, they talk about competition. They tell us how they think that, first of all, they tell us how they think that there's some form of competition that exists within these particular places once the rise happens, right? We think that in that world, they need to show us why there's that propensity of that particular thing happening just because of the rise that happens, right? Because in our world, at least regulations exist, right? It means that things like how they claim, people can just get onto the internet and be able to do things like how they are like their lessons about how exactly to engage in these particular investments. We think that those things happen the moment there's regulation existing, right? They tell you that, the regulation will not work, but this is why we think the regulation will work, right? In our world, because of the rise, we promote the idea of financial literacy. It means the state etc should have a natural incentive to want to do things that necessarily will help people to buy into that particular specific idea of financial literacy rather than all of those things that celebrities are selling online. That clashes out their case on exploitation etc, right? But they talk about how exactly they think that just because people invest in these particular things would have no incentive to invest in things like banks etc. We think that is highly flawed. Retrospectively within status quo, people are investing in all of these particular things, and so there's an investment in things like banks and the rest, right? These guys don't have a case. They argue a lot of assumptions, a lot of beautiful things, but think about it. It is retrospectively. Are these things happening in status quo? The answer is no. They don't have a case in today's debate.
I begin in three, two. Wait, sorry. I begin in three, two, one. We live in a society that allows people to still exist in the context with traditional investors. That means that in our world, the comparative is that we still have some level of retail investment, but we have the large proximity to traditional investors, like maybe institutional investors that are bigger companies who have an existence and who still have some level of sway, right? We think that is the likely comparative, and that is what we are supposed to defend. That is the counterfactual, and that is what we are going to show is better. We think OO is out of today's debate for very simple reasons. One, their conversations and everything they talk about are largely non-exclusive because they don't prove to us why there's a specific advantage that they preach. But everything they preach in today's debate is something that likely is not going to happen. Firstly, talk about how we are going to have economic development. Note that the people who are likely to be able to profit from things like the rise in retail investment are people who have the time and the money to actively track the stock market, to actively track these retail apps, to know that there's a specific time period in which you're supposed to invest and supposed to take time in. We need to note that this is not happening in abstract. This is happening in the context of the developing world and how and things like Western world, and how these people not necessarily have the time to actively sit down, because like people have lives. They're not going to have to look at computers all day to check the rising trends and the falling trends of the market such that they're able to make a financial decision. But that means that people will keep investing and are likely to lose their money at the end of the day. Why is this something that is true? Because at the point where there's no certainty, because that is something we bring exclusively from CG, the volatility of the market in of itself and how people are likely to have to put money in of these things always. Because note that at the point where you don't have an assurance that you are going to win, or you don't have an assurance that your investment is going to work. That means that people will probably keep on putting their money into these things, and at the point where they don't have the information to do this as they said, and the fact that they are not privy to actively check the information that they have, they're likely to have to keep on investing. That creates a cycle. That means that they actively have to keep on putting in money, have to try to, and then they'll think, oh, if I put in money and I lost money, then I have to put in more money to make my money back. That is how betting works, and that is what is the likely mechanism that is going to happen. We think that in that regard, everything they talk about economic investment is something that is not likely to happen, and we're going to show you why a comparative is slightly better in that regard. Why do we win today's debate? Firstly, we are going to provide to you a different, more likely context in which this debate is happening in. Yes, this debate happens in the Western world, obviously, but we believe that in all world, like in states that these things are likely to happen in, right? If there are enough regulations, etc., the debate cannot happen. But even if it happens, we are likely to have to prove to you that there are certain contexts that possess vulnerable actors that are likely to be more affected by the rise, i.e. the developing country, where stringent regulation structures are not likely to be able to work, where people are not likely to be able to hold their states more accountable, etc., and where the state does not have like such a huge power that they are able to be able to get some level of benefit. But note then that specific people will engage in certain specific ventures more. Like if you exist in Ghana, you're not likely to engage in the stock market, because the stock market, people don't even know that the stock market exists in Ghana. But they are likely to engage in crypto, because crypto is something that anybody can engage in. They are likely to engage in things like maybe like smaller micro investment opportunities, because these are things that people likely to happen in. This context is very important, and we're going to show you why. I'll take MPOY from CO. We think that with all the mechanisms that have existed in this debate about how there's media proliferation and how the rise actively promotes people actively buying into the idea that you are likely to get some level of benefit, because that's what the rise looks like. You'll be told that, oh yes, if you invest, you are going to get these things. If you invest, you are going to get a lot of money. That does not necessarily happen en masse in the world that we preach, where there's no rise, because the rise is what is important in today's debate, and the rise is where it happens. That means that even if people have an incentive to do these things, the general impact or the general negative impacts are things that are not likely to happen on scope. That is what we get in our world. That is what we bring in today's debate. We have one case on economic impact, and I'm going to give you 4 different reasons why this is important. Note that the way that these retail investments work is based on things like rumors, things like speculation. That is true. What do those rumors look like? Like you need to know what company is on the market, or which company's stocks are better, or what company or what crypto is better to be like engaged in now. What does this mean? Why are people more likely to be susceptible to rumors? Because note, things like media proliferation and how people don't have the resources to make that their rumors are true. That means that this leads to three impacts. Firstly, on the conversation of risk, and we think risk is the most important thing in today's debate, and any side has to be able to lie, to be able to prove how they are able to lessen risk in our world. Why is risk going to be created more in our world? Because we believe that with every person's specific decision, the more you are likely to do something that is risky and likely to hurt yourself in the long run. But at the point where we exist in interlocking markets, where people's agency, like if you invest in something and someone invests in something, it's likely to counteract. And so if more people invest in a specific thing, is likely to create a specific result. That means that our world has likely to have more risk, and a world with the rise has likely to have more risk, because we don't necessarily have a mechanism in which more people would want to invest. That means that more people are likely to engage in more riskier ventures. Because know that the way that these conversations work is that the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. It's like betting. The bigger money you put inside, the more money you risk to be able to get the reward, the more you're likely to get in. That means that more people are likely to invest to get a bigger incentive. Note that in the context of the developing world, it is likely to be even more affiliated, but this happens everywhere. People want to get more money, and they want to be able to get some level of money now, because people want to be able to fulfill their own economic incentives right now. That means then that at the point where we have a mechanism that proliferates this risk, firstly, the state is not likely to be able to scrutinize that risk, and that is something that is bad. Even if the reason why this is bad and the reason why this is important is because in a world where we have more risk, we are likely to lead to things like people actively invest in a specific thing, and then at the point where there's a conversation, as I've spoken to you with a conversation about rumors, then they withdraw all the money from those places, and that is likely to cause things like a certain cryptocurrency falling, and that means that the value of these cryptocurrencies are likely to hurt people. More people's investments are likely to crash down in a specific instance simply because of the fact of rumors. That is why risk is the most important thing in today's debate. We believe then that in our world, at least in the counterfactual, at least we have a mechanism that allows us to be able to calculate risk better, because we are engaging with institutional investors that we are likely to be proximate to. Note, these institutional investors can still have risk, that is true, but we believe that these institutional investors are firstly more accountable, but secondly not likely to do things because they have more experience and they have more resources to be able to go through the market to understand how these risky ventures work. But individual people don't necessarily have that thing. We bring to you a better mechanism, we bring to you risk, we are better in this world. CG.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we are going to analyze within today's debate is that there is still an incentive for people to always invest. The reason why there's still an incentive for people to always invest is that one, they want more money. The reason why they want more money is because it's a selfish desire for them to always grow their money. So in a case where you take away individual investment, that's what I'm going to refer to retail investment throughout my speech. If I use it, you know, if you take away individual investment, it doesn't mean these guys will just to put their money somewhere and say we are no longer investing. The second reason is that they want to create generational wealth. They want wealth that their children can come and also benefit from. When you have stocks in Apple, you can put it down, write a will, and give it to your first child. Next 100 years, if Apple is $100 trillion, you benefit off of it, your kids also benefit off of it. There's huge financial education that's going on within our spaces. What it then means is that these people are not understanding their need for investment. That's why they are always putting their money somewhere. So it means that they do not take away the need for investment. What it then means is that if you take away individual investment or retail investment, what you then do is that they want to put their money somewhere. The incentive for this growth over time
because the rise of cost of living within these spaces is one that is equally not matching the amount of money they make. So they equally also need to generate more money to catch up with the rise the cost of living. And equally, there's also like an overton window where most of the times people need to also shift towards such investments in due time to be able to meet. So at some point, they always tell you need to invest into such companies right now. What you then create is that if you take away this, people would invest. So what is the most obvious place that they are going to invest? That is what OG tells you, the institutional people, the banks. These are the obvious reasons why even you don't go to the bank. One, most of these institutional people look like this. They are investment banks, they are hedge funds, or either you employ someone who is going to manage your funds for you. So Bill Gates is not managing his funds. Some people are managing. There are big people who understand these things and manage his over 100 billion funds. The reason why people don't go to these things, first of all, it's very expensive to enter. Why is it very expensive to enter? Those companies, before you can create an investment account with them, the starting capital you need is one that most ordinary people who start investing with $10 on an app called Binance or something do not have $10,000 to start such investment account. Two, the fees at every point in time, monthly fees for holding the account alone is $2,000. Two, every time you purchase most of these stocks, all the time you have to take a commission. That's how banks make money. What it then means is that it becomes increasingly a high barrier of entry for most of these small people who are investing in retail investments. Because most of the people who invest in retail investments are people who are even buying fractions of stocks. They're not even able to purchase a full Apple stock, which is $1,000. They are buying fractions of it in the quantities of $60, $70. What it then means is that it becomes increasingly hard for them to use the traditional system. Next thing, there's a perception around these things that, these things are just for the wealthy. So even if they are very, very good options where people could go and get very good rates, because I never knew that Cow Bank has very, very good rates until Desmond told me about it. Their investment banks are very, very good. But the perception all of you have is that they are increasingly expensive for you to enter. Most of the people do not enter. Most of the people, the psychological thing that they have then prevents them from entering and asking you for those things. Lastly, most of you don't trust banks. Like, let's be very honest. All of you just think that their savings accounts, you do not get a lot of interest on most of it. So you think that even their investments, they are even going to steal away your money. They are just going to charge you so many fees for so many unnecessary things. It means that is increasingly bad. What it then means is that this is what we've analyzed you. You take away the most obvious way for most of the people to invest, but the alternative is one that most people are most likely not going to involve in. This is what you create. You create a gap in the market, which means that people who are within that market need to do something with their money. What's the most obvious thing that happens in that instance? When there is no form of individual investment, and institutional investment is one that is a huge barrier. It causes unrest within these people, and these people, the reason why they are even scared is because when their money is sitting in their bank account, inflation, they tell them inflation is taking away your money. So in the next 5 years, your 50 cedis would be worth 25 cedis now. What it then means is that this is where malicious actors who tell you, give me your money, in 2 months I will double it. This is where they come in and fill those gaps. The reason why those people become much more appealing to these individuals is because, one, the sort of marketing they do is that, one, these are the options we have. The barrier to entry is very, very low. You can start off with 5 CD. That is what majority of these people did, the Men's Gold and the rest. They can start off with very, very little. They started doing one on WhatsApp last year. One, if you start doing this very, very simple, you can grow to a certain point in time. Most of these things are Ponzi schemes. Before you continue, because of time. Yeah. So we compare. So what it means is that the Ponzi schemes are much more prevalent in the urban groups to promote these things. So now the comparative. This is the issue that happens within today's debate. On both sides, some form of investment will still exist. On our side, we say that the investment that exists with retail investment is one that is controlled and regulated by institutions. In the United States, it's the Securities and Exchange Commission that regulates all of these things. what they do and what they tax most of these investment apps to do is to always do financial education and always tell people who give financial education online to always give a caveat that they are not financial advisors and they should always be. There's much more regulation on their side as opposed to the Ponzi scheme you talked about, because what I've analyzed is that the Ponzi scheme exists on their side. On our side, there are much more repercussions that is given towards individuals who involve themselves in Ponzi scheme. Like Sam Bankman-Fried is in prison for crying out loud. All the people who are involved in the Silicon Valley banks are in prison. You cannot touch the Ponzi scheme guy who was deceiving you on WhatsApp. What it then means is that speculation on their side is even higher because their institutional bodies are ones who have control over media. They are ones who have control over everything, so they can be able to speculate about prices and all of those things. Regulation on that side is even much more worse. You take away everything from the small guy and you just leave them to suffer.
Let's do this. Okay. Three, two, one. Panel, starting from closing opposition. What do they tell us? They say that, oh, there's a cost on traditional investment and not everybody can be able to access it. So we need to create like an alternative, or the rise is good because the rise has created an alternative that will cause people to want to invest more, or to cause people who don't even have a lot of money to be able to invest. Panel, we think that weighing up on our case means that for a venture that is as risky as this, we need to be able to create a cushion for exactly those people who do not have a lot of money, who are putting the very little that they have into these ventures. What that necessarily means is that in our world, because of that particular idea of the rise, there has been very little like ability, and countries are playing catch up when it comes to regulations. What that means is that their case on regulations are ones that are not going to run in this debate because of things like the ability for the states to not be able to like regulate things like cryptocurrency, but then secondly, the fact that like states that exist in the developing world who are like having to deal with this rise cannot play catch up, have not been able to play catch up with those regulations. That inherently means that at any point in time, they need to prove why these people that don't have a lot of money should put that little money into that volatile market that might end up be fucking them up later on. But then panel, we think that secondly, also on the cost of traditional investments, we think that panel in our world, right? Note that because retail investments would exist but will exist on a smaller scale, it means that the people that have little money that want to invest will invest nonetheless. Our world just caters for the excesses that would exist. Note, the rise in itself has also created a culture. What that means that culture has influenced a lot more people to want to invest. What that means that large scale incentive to want to put their money somewhere only comes because of the rise. That necessarily means that without the rise, that large scale incentive does not exist. That necessarily means that is not something that they can run in today's debate. So people will not even be worried about the cost of traditional investments nonetheless. But then secondly, they say incentive to exist will exist in both worlds. But I argue to you that the reason why the incentive is on such a large scale is because the rise has created a certain culture that everybody should do crypto. That is why people, when students come to school and they see that their friends are buying cars because they invest into cryptocurrency, they also want to buy cars. That necessarily means that without the rise, that culture and that push and that forced for people to go into things like retail investment does not exist, because you don't have a large majority of people telling you that this is a good thing, you absolutely have to do it. What that necessarily means that on their side, the incentive might exist, but the incentive exists on a smaller scale on our side, and there's not a large force that is pushing people to want to go and invest in retail investments nonetheless. But the panel, they say that, oh, there's a narrative that investment is just for the wealthy, and then there's a gap. And that gap means that people will not be able to invest or be able to access this like thing. We think that first off, what side CEO has to prove to us is why this like access is important. Because just saying that people have to access something is not enough to win you the debate. You have to prove to us why accessibility is important in this particular instance. Because a lot of things exist that people don't have access to. It doesn't mean that the no access is a bad thing. They then have to prove why accessibility is extremely important for every single person to have access to this particular thing. But then panel note again, we think that we think that at the end of the day, the gap that exists is not one that is extremely like detrimental to the world. Why? Because then there is not extremely risky ventures that people would have to like put their money in and lose at the end of the day. If the gap means that people are safer and people's money are safer, we think that gap is beneficial. We should buy into that gap. But the panel, yes, closing. So panel, note that because of those things, that is why the traditional investment system is better. Because we have been able to go through all of these things and fix it and create cushions so that we can be able to survive some of these things. That is why in the Federal Reserve, that's in the United States, there is a 250,000 deposit for everybody who loses their money at a point where a bank fails. What that means is that for everybody else, when they lose their money, the bank will provide like a deposit of that amount like to you. So if your money is in that particular range, $0 to $250,000, you still get your money nonetheless. What that means is that that particular thing that we have gone through etc are things that have created those cushions for us. We think that is not a cushion. There's no such cushion that exists with these markets. We don't see a world where we should invest into these markets etc. Yes, opening. So panel, let us move into our case, and that will directly tackle with OO. What is our case? One, we talked to you about panic withdrawals and how those panic withdrawals are extremely bad for the markets and extremely bad for like these markets in themselves. One, because of the fact that like these people or like invest into these things with the aim of getting short-term relief, because they say people want to get opportunities, they want to be relieved off of their poverty etc. What that necessarily means is that the people that are putting money into these things are actively looking for things like short-term relief that will take them out of their poverty. But they're not. They are investing very little, but they want amount of money that will take them out of their poverty. What that means is that investing one city and wanting to get like a lot of money to take you out of your poverty, that inherently means that at the end of the day, that means that there is a lot of like things that comes when it comes to the panic withdrawal. What that looks like is that means that as long as they see that these stakes are going low, or because they don't have a lot of money, they feel like stakes are low, they will take their money out of these like markets. That will make the markets fail in of themselves. That inherently hurts other people who have invested into these places and have been able to put their money there and all of that. But then secondly, the way that this affects the economy is such that when you have your economy built on these things, it highly affects them in such a way that they then would have to like they cause a lot of things, shocks in the economy etc that we cannot be able to protect. But if shocks already exist in the economy, it exacerbates those shocks to the extent that we cannot like the economy now suffer, people will not be able to benefit etc and all of those things. We think that in itself means that is bad for us to be able to invest in these markets. We don't need those things to be able to like happen. The reason why that case is important is the urgency that it shows you today's debate, that we need to be able to protect these markets because of the volatility. What that means is that we don't need people to want to like people that really don't know about these markets to invest, because when they do so, they pull out at any like short sight or something that is going on. But the panel, we bring you an important context of developing country. One, that they don't have the infrastructure for these things, but because of globalization, the rights has also gotten to them, and now they are suffering from these things. What that necessarily means is that because they are the more vulnerable, states, it's something that is extremely bad for them. But then panel notes another thing, or the use of this particular information. What that necessarily means is that like they say, there's availability of information on the bank, but that's that people are using it. In their world, they have to prove exactly why the availability leads to like the usage and accessibility of this proudly chosen government.
exercise opening. I'll take it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. This is CG2. Okay. Let's start now. CG, and I think to an extent OG, says that the rise occurred because, like, so, no, wait, let me see. I think, no, come on. What's happening to me? Guys, really sorry, let me restart. Alright, let's start now. CG, and to an extent OG, says that the incentive to invest was created by the rise. Incredibly unintuitive. Let me explain. Incentive, it's what makes you want to do something. It's like this. Incentive to action. It's like you are hungry, then you eat. These guys say you eat, then you are hungry. Makes no fucking sense. What does Martin explain to you about the incentives for why people want to invest and why this then has led to the specific rise we are discussing in today's debate? A number of things. I think about 5 separate things. The first is just the selfish incentive he explained. Second, the incentive to create generational wealth. Third, the incentive to invest that comes as a natural effect of exposure to financial education, which has naturally emerged from people going to school, banks and all of these things going an incentive to do these things via social media and all of these things. I think the fourth incentive he explained was that because of things like rising cost of living, rising inflation rates, all of these things, people are realizing that they need to democratize, they need to expand in their income sources, and all of those things are incentives for why people do these things. What's the implication of this? It means then that this natural rise of incentives to invest is what has specifically led to the rise of people taking up this role to do retail investments in that specific regard. What's the implication of this that Martin explains to you? It means that in a world where this retail investment does not happen, that incentive part does not go away. It's like this again. You are hungry, but this time around, instead of eating food, you drink water. The incentive, hungry, does not go away. So if the debate is about eating food, you cannot simply say once they don't eat food, the incentive to eat, which is hunger, does no longer exist. That's the intuition for our case. What this then means then is that given that incentive to exist does not necessarily go away, it means that itch to invest has to be scratched one way or the other. Martin explains to you that there are 2 possible alternatives. The first is the one they've characterized. That is doing institutionalized investments, picking hedge funds, mutual funds, all of these things. He explains to you why these things are incredibly inaccessible and why because of these things then people tap into black market alternatives like Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, all of those things. He explains the extensive harms. But let's take these guys at their best and explain why that is even problematic. So even at their best, people invest in things like hedge funds and all of those things. Why is it problematic? 2 general things. The first is that generally these guys are even incredibly harder to regulate than personal retail investment in that specific regard. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but follow me. The reason why regulation is incredibly harder on their side is because who does regulation? It's politicians, it's people, parliamentarians, all of these things. What's the crucial thing about these guys? These guys run in elections. These guys need funding to run in elections. It means that specifically, these guys are weak to things like lobbying on the side of these guys, of these big hedge funds and all of those things. It's why incredibly, these guys have not been able to be regulated over time. It's why #1 can still not be found. Because even though the guy lives in his house every day, he's lobbying the active lawmakers, the law enforcers, and they can simply not regulate him. So if it's about regulation, it's incredibly weaker on their side. But secondly, speculation. And that's the POI I asked them. Because all she says in response to the POI is that, because of 2008, governments have created recovery mechanisms. She did not say that because of 2008, speculation by these hedge funds have gone down. The reason why these hedge funds speculate a lot, and the reason why they have an active incentive to speculate, is that compared to the individual person understands the trade-off he's making by investing. He knows that this money could have bought me wache, and I'm putting it in these specific things. For the hedge fund, they are disconnected from whoever is putting their money inside. So they will use your money anyhow because they don't fucking care, because one, they cannot be regulated. But how is speculation even worse on their side? They are able to do things like short stocks and all of those things. Because of the amount of money they have media houses in their pocket. So Bloomberg can simply pay Bloomberg to push specific articles so that specific stocks rise in value and all those things. They can do things like short stocks. That is to say, because they are on scale, they have a lot more Apple stocks, for instance. They can short Apple stocks and get a lot of profit. All of these things are maximized on their side because, like I've explained, these guys have detached one from the trade-off that people are making to tap into these things. But secondly, also they can actively not be regulated. So even in their best case scenario, where people do not do what Martin says they do, but they tap into traditional listings, it's still problematic. They cannot win on either side. But why is our side incredibly harmful? Why is what we say incredibly harmful, and because of that, then both gas teams win? What Martin explains to you is that these malicious actors are unable to be found, like even worse than hedge funds and all of these things. These guys are incredibly difficult to regulate because of the ways in which they do their marketing, because of the ways in which they are led. So they do peer-to-peer marketing. They incentivize peer-to-peer marketing because of the structures of Ponzi schemes in that specific regard. They give you an active incentive to rope your friend in. But the barrier of entry is incredibly low too, because on the comparative, like maybe hedge funds will need you to invest a minimum amount of maybe $1,000 or all those things. I'm coming. These Ponzi schemes, one CD is enough. Like, and they understand these marketing schemes in that specific regard. Who has the PI? Yeah.
So you actively know how I analyze investment has become decentralized, completely institutional, traditional banks.
Yeah, Martin explains to you the perception analysis. So maybe it is not true that these banks do not have low portfolios that people can invest in. But we've all grown up with these perceptions. And perception can be different from the reality. But once that perception exists, it's difficult to take it away, and people act upon those perceptions. That's why people still do these things, even if it is true about what we say. We don't think it is true anyway. I think the weighing then is simple. And let's be very, very serious. Like, this is a regret motion. It's not a policy motion. There's nothing about, oh, we solve problems, we don't solve problems. It's more about whether or not comparatively the counterfactual would have been better. Our case is incredibly then more comparative than these guys, because they're betting the place on these guys to solve something by regretting something. Makes no fucking sense. You don't solve problems by regretting things. It's just bad, and that's why you regret it. We explain why specifically you shouldn't regret it by actually explaining why the counterfactual is terrible. I think the question then these guys try to pose it is, oh, but Ponzi schemes would exist on both sides. The problem is, even though they exist on both sides, on our side, there are more legitimate alternatives that are also easy to access. On their side, those legitimate incentives do not exist. So the only legitimate alternatives that exist are hard to access. That's why Ponzi schemes are way more powerful on your side. Look, the debate is simple. Once the incentive exists, and this rise cannot exist